Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the fact that Brad Winderbaum literally dropped the bomb in a recent interview with Screen Rant. Oh my goodness. And he has left Daredevil fans smiling. Well, obviously, Daredevil himself is smiling. So, yeah, what is this all about? What did Winterbaum say? And what does it mean? I mean, I'll tell you what my opinion is. And of course, obviously, in the comments, you can tell me your opinion. But yeah, big bomb from Winterbaum. All right, so without further ado, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. So don't forget, we do have a January contest running all month long. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment. One random winner will be announced on the video in early February and can choose from one of the books or steel books above. And we do have the membership option for those who want to support the channel in that fashion and maybe help me do this full time at some point. But also, any way you support the channel is fantastic. Subscribing, liking videos, leaving comments, it all helps. So thank you very much. Okay, let's be crystal clear on one thing that I think is really important to note. When the shows were first coming out, Kevin Feige flat out confirmed they are canon to the MCU. There's a video, you can still go check it out if you want. It's called Full Marvel Studios Q&A with President Kevin Feige about MCU Phase 3. Came out in 2014, as you can see, by Inside the Magic. And the last question on the video, so if you don't want to watch the whole video, head to the very end. And he is asked, is there room for the Defenders, which obviously that's all the Netflix shows, to show up on the big screen in the Infinity War movie? Because there was already buzz about Infinity War coming out. Feige said there's a lot of people from the movies in Infinity War. He then kind of meanders a little bit, to be honest. But anyway, he lands the plane and says all of those things, which includes the Defenders, inhabit, however far on the outskirts, the same continuity. So certainly that opportunity exists. So this is really important because there's just no doubt that when the shows were being produced, they were considered canon. They were not considered this outskirts branching thing that now there's some debates on. They were main MCU canon, and Feige himself said so. Until, of course, Feige then seemed to change his mind. So the Timeline book comes out then, and he writes a overview intro to the Timeline book, and he says a couple things. First of all, he says the obvious. The book only includes 30 films, 8 series, and 4 phases. Well, 8 series, that's just the Disney Plus series, not the pre-Disney Plus series. So they're left out of the book. You got that. Then you got the fact that he says the timeline presented in this book is specific to MCU's sacred timeline, and that's really important. Keep that phrasing in mind. It's going to come back throughout Phase 4. So he's basically saying, hey, there's other stuff out there, but it's all branches off of the sacred timeline, kind of like What If is, right? Those are branches off the main timeline, and they're canon to the MCU. They happened. They just didn't happen in this sacred timeline. So that seems to be what he's saying there. And then he says, for now, this is the history of the MCU unraveled from end to end. Now, I wish he would just be crystal clear and say, hey, those Daredevil shows, they are canon to the sacred timeline. Or, hey, those shows, they're not. They're a What If branch. I wish he would be 100% clear, because while these statements seem pretty clear, you then have Miss Minutes throwing this in there. So in her intro, she says this isn't everything that happens in 616, much less the multiverse. Now, at the time, people took this both ways. They took it to say, aha, see, the book just doesn't include the Netflix shows, but they are canon to the sacred timeline. Or they took it to mean, well, he's saying that it can't include everything. I mean, for example, the one-shot funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer, bizarrely is not included in the book, even though it's canon. So the bottom line is, I think Feige tried to be clear and say they're not canon to the sacred timeline, but he didn't say it. So in my mind, once canon, always canon, until Feige says differently, and I did not consider this definitive enough. Because now, look what we get. We get this Screen Rant interview with Brad Winderbaum, who's a very important producer, and he says, or he's asked, is everything that happened on the Netflix series a part of the sacred timeline or not? And I really appreciate the interviewer saying that. The interviewer could have said, is it MCU canon? Well, the answer is yes. It's obviously MCU canon, but is it sacred timeline canon? That's all that matters. So the interviewer is wisely using the same vernacular that Feige used in his book. So what does Winderbaum say? So all I can say, that up until this point, we've been a little cagey. Yes, you have. Cagey about what is sacred timeline and what's not sacred timeline. That was born of, frankly, a period at the studio where we were like, we have to stick the landing with Avengers. And I understand his point there. He's basically saying, Infinity War and Endgame, that is our focus. We cannot worry about every little other thing going on. But keep in mind, this is the same time frame when Feige said they are canon. So it's weird that he's pointing back to a time frame in the studio, in the life of the studios, where Feige was crystal clear. That is weird. He then says it was another part of the company developing the Netflix stuff, and that's true. It was Marvel TV. And now Marvel TV is under Feige, but it wasn't at the time. We were aware of what they were doing. They were aware of what we were doing, but it was a lot to balance anyway. So again, everything he's saying is correct, but he keeps pointing back to a period of time where Feige confirmed their canon. Now he seems to imply they're not. Feige, very weird. And here's the strangest part. Winderbaum says, but now that some time has passed, and now that we actually see how well integrated the stories are, and I agree they are, I think that personally, I, Brad Winderbaum, would be confident in saying it's part of the sacred timeline. Oh, so this is so weird to me. He's saying now we realize they're integrated, even though they just put out a timeline book that implied they're not. Oy vey, Marvel, stop. Would you just be crystal clear? And then even more, he says, for some reason, I, Brad Winderbaum, feel this way. Now, he's a key producer, so I can't believe he would say something that isn't what Feige wants him to say, although Nate Moore has said some pretty bizarre things. Watch some of my earlier timeline videos. You'll know how I feel about Nate Moore sometimes. Love the dude. Love you, Nate. But some of his interviews, you're like, what are you saying? Anyway, this is so frustrating to me. Is it or is it not? Well, again, folks, my opinion, it's canon until somebody says it's not. And if anything, he's saying it is. He's saying it's sacred timeline canon. So I'm assuming all of the Defender shows, or at least the Daredevil shows, are canon. And we'll get to the rest of the Defender shows in a minute here. Here's the real interesting thing. There are 37 pre-Disney Plus shows out there. 37. Now, and the 468 episodes, and they run from 2013 to 2021, and Hitmonkey's getting another season, so they'll have to update this chart in a second. Now, I think everybody would agree, Hitmonkey and MODOK are not canon to the MCU. Likewise, Legion and Runaways may or may not be canon to the X-Men timeline. I cover that in different videos, but the bottom line is they're not canon to the sacred timeline either. But all the rest of these shows potentially could be canon to the sacred timeline. Again, not what if branches, the sacred timeline. So there is a lot here to look at. And here's what's kind of funny. I hear so many fans saying, oh, the homework, oh, the homework. These shows are great, by the way. You should watch them all. But people complaining about the homework, and yet at the same time, we have the insistence, obviously, that these are all canon. So it's a weird dichotomy between the fan base that don't want homework, yet want these to be canon. Again, I think they're all canon. I don't know how many times I need to say that, so in the comments, you don't say that I don't think they're canon. I think they're all canon because Feige has not said anything different, other than Hitmonkey and MODOK again. All right. In fact, I have so much respect for these shows that I've done multiple timeline videos and connection videos. I've done a timeline video on the Defenders shows, on the ABC shows, on the Hulu Freeform shows. I did a really cool connections video, which I highly recommend you watch as you're getting ready for Echo, because it goes over all the connections between all of the pre-Disney Plus shows and the main MCU. I did a timeline video on the newscasts, a timeline video on the X-Men, timeline video on Spider-Man, timeline video on the Spider-Man video games, and even all the connections between the Spider-Verse and other live stream media. So I think all this stuff is important. I've devoted a ton of time to it because it matters. It really matters. So I want to make that clear for anybody watching this so you understand my context going into all of this. So what do we do with the rest of the Defenders shows? Because the specific question Winderbaum was asked was Daredevil. He wasn't asked about the other Defenders shows. But let's be honest, they all cross over, right? There's no way Daredevil could be part of the sacred timeline and the rest of the shows aren't. And while Punisher didn't show up like in the big team-ups, he obviously showed up in Daredevil. So clearly you cannot have just Daredevil come in. All of the Defenders shows have to come in. Plus the Defenders supporting cast, which is awesome, by the way, fantastic supporting cast. These characters keep showing up through each of the different series. You just cannot have one without the other. So while Winderbaum was asked about Daredevil, in my mind, all 6 of the shows have to be canon to the sacred timeline. You can't have one without the others. So this is really interesting. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe wiki team, by the way, best wiki on the planet, did this really cool, and I know it looks confusing at first, but we're going to break this down, chart showing how all of the pre-Disney Plus shows tie to each other. So first of all, let's look at the acronyms, starting at the top of the clock and going clockwise, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Defenders, Inhumans, Punisher, Runaways, Cloak and Dagger, and Hellstrom. So they're showing how they're all out there and the ties between them. So the arrows go from point A to point B, meaning that element from A is referenced in or appearing in B, if that makes sense. So something we can pick out at the very top. Agent Carter is referenced in, or actually kind of appears in flashbacks, in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. obviously doesn't show up in Agent Carter. That's impossible from a timeline standpoint. So makes sense, right? So then there's faint gray arrows. Those are basically Easter eggs. The black arrows, those are very firm connections. And then the thick red arrows are very strong connections, meaning you can't have one without the other. All right, so let's talk about the black arrows, not the faint gray arrows, but the black arrows. Notice there are a lot of black arrows pointing from the Defenders shows over to Cloak and Dagger, as well as black arrows pointing from Luke Cage over to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So let's talk about those connections, because this is really a question of whether bringing in the Defenders means you have to bring a Cloak and Dagger and you have to bring in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm not saying they're not all canon. Again, I'll say over and over again, they're all canon because Feige has not specifically said they're not. What I'm really looking at is they've now said Defenders absolutely is, so what does that mean for these other black arrows? Well, here's some of the examples. Luke Cage and Cloak and Dagger do reference each other. Misty Knight, over on the far left, is friends with Bridget O'Reilly from Cloak and Dagger over on the right. So they each reference each other and their experience and time with each other. It's not a very relevant reference, though. It's just a fun wink and a nod. I would call it more than an Easter egg, but it's not crucial to the plot, and they could potentially be referring to different characters if you wanted to pull in just Luke Cage, but not Cloak and Dagger. I mean, another example is Cloak and Dagger has an Easter egg for Luke Cage. That's clearly a picture of Luke Cage, and then that's Cloak looking at it. Then we also have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. referencing Daredevil, because Crusher Creel, who's awesome, the Absorbing Man in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., is alluded to being, directly, I believe, the Crusher Creel that's tied to Daredevil's father and his boxing time. So that's cool. It's very cool. We also have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. referencing Daredevil here, because they talk about, notice down in the bottom in the news ticker, gang war rages in Hell's Kitchen. So Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is showing a news ticker talking about Daredevil. And then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. directly references the Judas bullet, because they try to use it in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episodes. But in most of these cases, it's really a one-way reference, or in the case of Bridget O'Reilly, a reference that you could kind of eliminate if you wanted. So my point is, the reason the wiki team focused on the red arrows, which I'll show in this graph here, is to say these are the things you cannot pull in without pulling in the other. So obviously they're saying the 6 Defenders shows from Netflix, you got to have them all, period, end of story. On the other hand, Agent Carter, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Inhumans, those are really tied together, and Cloak and Dagger and Runaways are, because Cloak and Dagger appeared in Runaways. And then poor Hellstrom. Love you, Hellstrom, but it doesn't really tie to anything when you get down to the solid red arrows. So, okay, bottom line is I do think this technically could just bring in the Netflix shows and nothing else, but I'm just bringing that up to show it. Again, I'll say it one more time. They're all canon, because Feige refuses to say they're not. But anyway, so let's look at how we have integrated, how the MCU has integrated in the characters from the series, the Daredevil series so far. No Way Home obviously had Matt Murdock, and Hawkeye had Kingpin. And I love some of these awesome references. I mean, you see on the bottom left, that's season 3 of Daredevil, and that's the same place that shows up, the same hotel that shows up in the Hawkeye series. Obviously, his cufflink was so important throughout the Daredevil series, and that's what Kate Bishop uses to set off the arrows and defeat him. So basically, in my mind, No Way Home and Hawkeye perfectly tied in to the Daredevil series. Now, I have heard people argue, yeah, but Kingpin is so much stronger in Hawkeye. I mean, he rips a door off its hinges, takes an arrow to the heart, gets hit by a car, gets blown up by the dangerous arrow that Kate Bishop sets off with his cufflink, and of course gets shot in the head. Now, I will point out in the comics he also got shot in the head, but still, you could argue, yeah, he does seem a lot stronger. My theory is he might have gotten juiced with something, a super soldier serum derivative, which I would love that. I would love for him to be really, really strong in the MCU, and maybe something happened between the Daredevil series and modern day, if you will, MCU. But I will point out, he was pretty darn strong in the Daredevil series. I mean, I do some bench pressing myself. I ain't never bench pressed something like that. I don't know how much that is. I'm assuming each of those weights is 100 pounds, so that might actually be a ton that he's lifting. Oh my goodness. I mean, Frank Castle ain't jumping in there to lift it. So he's really strong. And also in Daredevil season 3, he picks up, I'm just going to say someone in a Daredevil costume because I don't want to do any spoilers for the show, but picks him up like he's a paperweight, right? Throws him against a wall. I mean, that's pretty darn strong. Now, is it rip a door off a hinges strong like he did in Hawkeye? I don't know. Those debates can go on and on. So it's possible he didn't get juiced with anything, and he's always been this strong. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe they'll give us more of his backstory in Echo and then Daredevil Born Again. So let's talk about Daredevil's appearance in She-Hulk. Did they tie in with the series there? Absolutely. They were so consistent on his history and powers. These are all things mentioned during the She-Hulk episodes, I should say. He's from New York. He runs a practice in Hell's Kitchen. He does mostly pro bono work. We actually hear the Daredevil's theme music. That's awesome. At one point, he says, he's lying. Don't ask how I know how. Well, of course, we do know how because he can hear heartbeats. So we learn that. He smells the jet fuel with his extrasensory perception, and that's how he wins that court case, if you remember. She-Hulk clap impairs his radar. Very consistent. He keeps his identity secret. He has the retractable billy club. He has that awesome discussion about goons versus henchmen. That's so like pulled out of the Daredevil series that he would go to the extent of explaining, no, there is a difference between a goon and a henchman. And of course, we got a hallway fight. Nowhere near as good as Daredevil Season 1's hallway fight. But again, all of these things were to try to say, this is the same character. I thought that was great. Now, they do have a few changes thrown in, but I don't think any of these are really an issue. He's clearly way more acrobatic when he fights She-Hulk than he was ever in the Netflix series, but maybe he just didn't use, he didn't need to be that acrobatic. But I like it that it's a little more comic accurate that he's that acrobatic. And I think we'll see more of that in some of his fights down the road. Obviously, we have the costume color change, but that wasn't an issue at all. I mean, I think it was a reference to his first appearance in Spider-Man, where he had the yellow and red. But obviously, he's allowed to change his costume. That's no big deal. It was a little concerning at first when She-Hulk didn't know who Daredevil was. But then remember, Titania did. So at first, I was like, oh, no, are they trying to say it's a reboot? But no, Titania knew he existed, knew who he was. So that, if anything, tied back to the show all the more. And then I sure hope he's not dating Karen Page since he had a little afternoon delight with Jennifer Walters. But that's okay. We need to find out what's going on with Karen Page. And again, these are some changes, but they're not bad changes. They're still consistent. They're just things that have he's grown since the Daredevil series ended. Okay, this is the one that a lot of people debated on, but I don't consider it an issue at all. He uses Luke Jacobson to create his costume while he's out in L.A. instead of Melvin Potter. Well, if you remember from the series, Melvin Potter was sent to jail. So he probably wanted to have nothing to do with Matt Murdock or Daredevil, anymore. But also, and this controversy will never end, it did look like he was killed. I don't know. Is that him? I mean, here's what's weird. Look at the outfit he's wearing. They even put the same outfit. It looks the same. And then look at his neck. See the injury to his neck? Even that dude has the injury to his neck. Well, I don't know. I would still like to think it's not him because I love Melvin. And I would like to think Melvin went to prison, got out, and then had a wonderful life. But anyway, you can leave in the comments if you think that's him. They sure made it look like him. That's the bottom line. But anyway, so even this change made total sense. So here's my real point. Up to this point, everything has been consistent with Daredevil season 1 through 3. I love that. And then the latest Echo trailer even had flashbacks to the Daredevil series. I'm just showing one of many, which was, of course, the hammer, which if you've seen the Daredevil series, you know how important that hammer is to shaping the life of Wilson Fisk. Now, I will say that Marvel is into nostalgia bait. We know that because the Marvels, in their final trailer, legit had Thanos. Why, Marvel? Why did you do that? Thanos had nothing to do with the movie. By the way, it's a good movie. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth seeing. But that's not the point. Marvel loves to do this type of thing. So I don't know whether this means we're actually going to get flashbacks to the Daredevil series or not. But nonetheless, it was very cool to see this in the trailer. Also, this kind of flew under the radar. I didn't see it. There's hints that Iron Fist is returning. Maybe not the Iron Fist we might be thinking, though. So these rumors came out late last year. And Can We Get Some Toast, the infamous Can We Get Some Toast, said that Iron Fist is expected to enter the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the Eyes of Wakanda series, the new Black Panther series that's going to look throughout the history of Wakanda. So therefore, it may have flashbacks to an earlier an earlier Iron Fist. Basically, it would be before the current Iron Fist. So I still don't know what they're going to do with Danny Rand and him. I mean, obviously he was in the Netflix series, and they're making Netflix canon. So what do we do with that? I guess we'll just have to see. You can leave in the comments whether you would like to see Finn Jones come back as Danny Rand, or whether you even want Iron Fist to come back. But anyway, it does look like we may get an earlier Iron Fist sooner than later. Very cool. Here's the real irony of things, though. The Marvel Spotlight stories are supposed to be not entwined, rather, in the larger MCU. It doesn't mean they're not canon. Obviously, Echo is canon to the Sacred Timeline. It's going to be in the Disney Plus timeline. There's no doubt. But what they're trying to say is the Marvel Spotlight stories don't require you to quote unquote do the homework. I really hate that phrase because I love Marvel, so why would I consider anything homework? But nonetheless, a lot of fans do, so I'm respecting that. So they're saying, hey, you can just watch this series. It's isolated. It's kind of like the comics. There was a Marvel Spotlight comic, and it had, like in this case, a Werewolf by Night. It also had Moon Knight and other characters just kind of showed up, and you didn't have to know a lot of their past. Well, think about how ironic it would be if Echo comes out, the first in the Marvel Spotlight series, and it requires you to watch 3 seasons of Daredevil, 39 episodes, each about an hour long. There's something funny about that, really. Oh, well. Anyway, so that's why I do not think Echo will require you to have seen Daredevil. But if you did watch it, you'll enjoy it all the more. And speaking of, if you want to watch it, I do have a timeline out there. I mean, the way I did the timelines for some of these other shows is I did them separately because I like this. I like seeing it like this. This shows how the Netflix shows all tie together. As we've discussed, they barely tie in to the larger MCU. I did put on the left, what's happening in the larger MCU at the time, but there's barely any references. I mean, for example, Luke Cage does reference the Avengers, talks about the incident, but that is practically Easter egg level reference. There's other times like where Iron Fist references Sokovia. Okay, that's great, but again, you didn't have to have watched Civil War to have understood the storyline. They did this intentionally. They didn't want you to feel like you have to go watch the main MCU just to understand the Netflix shows and vice versa. So personally, I like the timeline separated like this. And by the way, there's a few other Easter eggs. I didn't include them all, but none of them are major. So I personally like seeing it like this rather than interwoven together. But for those that do want them interwoven together, I do have on my Google Drive, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can go out there and find it if you want. This has everything. I mean, literally every show. Even movies that from way in the past, the 2003 Incredible Hulk is in here, and on and on and on. The cartoons, you name it. So you can sort this by release order or by timeline order. And there's a filter, so you can filter what you want. So notice like Fox movies, MCU movies, Netflix shows, etc. So anyway, that's out there. You can download it, do whatever you want with it, etc. But I've put everything in there because I do have massive respect for these other shows. I just personally like the timelines separate. But here's the bottom line. What do I think will be the fate of these pre-Disney Plus shows? So really, we're talking about all 12 now. There's 12 main shows that are part of the discussion. What do I think is going to happen? Well, there's option number 1, that all shows, notice I'm saying remain Sacred Timeline canon, because I still feel they're canon until Feige says specifically that they're not. He hasn't said that, so they're all canon in my mind. So they could all stay canon. Another possibility is some of the shows become the branch off the Sacred Timeline type deal, and the rest are Sacred Timeline. So right now, you could say that Winderbaum confirmed the 6 Defenders shows, but he didn't necessarily confirm Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Inhumans, etc. So, okay, that's another possibility. We could even have a case where they eliminate certain seasons or even episodes because Runaways finale has some time travel that's a little troublesome for the MCU. So maybe they just say, all right, fine, that episode didn't happen. Okay. I mean, that's an option, is they pick and choose some of the shows and even some of the seasons. Or, and this is my gut feel for where it's all going to end up, all of the shows are a branch, every single one. However, the Sacred Timeline will pull in any of the elements they want from the original shows. If you take Winterbaum's comment and Feige's comment in the timeline book, which again are only a few months apart, oh, Marvel, you're killing me. you could argue that what they're really saying, both of them combined, is, hey, you can go watch those original Daredevil shows, in fact, all the Netflix shows, and you're going to see elements of those coming forward, but we want to be able to deviate if we want to. So, for example, Elektra, we may redo the Elektra storyline. We may not bring back Iron Fist. We may even say Iron Fist never existed, although I don't know how they can do that, to be honest. So, interesting, right? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Which of these three is the direction they're going to go? Now, I'm not saying what, well, you can tell me both. Tell me what you think is the situation right now after Winterbaum's quote, and tell me what you think the situation is for where they're going to go. To me, I think number one is where they're at now, and number three is where they're going to end up going. But we'll see. We'll see. Either way, I can't wait for Echo to drop. It is going to be awesome. It's coming right around the corner. It's going to be spectacular. All 5 episodes, all at once. I'm going to try to watch them all at once. We'll see whether I can do it, because it's going to get pretty late since they're 9 Eastern for me. But nonetheless, very exciting. Don't forget, we do have the January contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You might win a book or a steel book. We have the membership option if you're interested. And then I will also leave a pinned comment about our Discord server, because we're having a new What If contest. So that's going to be awesome. We'd love to have you join the Discord server. And of course, the pinned comment will also have how to get to the Google Drive. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.